All right, so are you ready to dive into this book on negotiation? Never split the difference. We're going deep today. You shared a summary with me, so I'm thinking you want to get the core ideas down fast. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the goal. It's a fascinating book. Voss is a former FBI hostage negotiator, and at first you think, okay, hostage situations, that's intense. But then as you read the book, he really shows you how these tactics can apply in everyday situations like business deals or even just trying to get your teenager to clean their room, you know?
Yeah, that's what really struck me about it, too. It's so practical. But before we get into the specifics, I've got to ask. When I hear the word negotiation, I think winning. Is that even the right way to think about it going into a negotiation?
Well, Voss actually completely flips that script. He says it's not about winning in the traditional sense. The
Hmm.
core principle in his approach is what he calls tactical empathy. It's not just about feeling someone's emotions, it's about truly understanding their perspective, their motivations.
So instead of trying to like bulldoze over the other person, you're trying to get inside their head?
Exactly. He even uses this phrase, getting to that's right, rather than just yes. A simple yes, could mean that they're just agreeing to end the conversation. But getting to that's right means they genuinely feel understood. He even suggests using a late night FM DJ voice.
Okay, so now you just got to explain that one. That sounds a little out there to me.
Yeah, right. It does. But it's this idea of creating a calm, trustworthy presence, like lowering your voice, speaking a little bit slower.
Mm.
It's about subtly disarming the other person, making them feel safe. It's counterintuitive, but in high stakes situations, it can be incredibly effective.
It's almost like you're lulling them into a sense of security so they'll open up.
Right.
But then how do you keep that momentum going once you've kind of disarmed them a little bit?
Well, one technique Voss uses is mirroring, and mirroring is basically just repeating the last few words of what someone says.
Oh, really?
It seems simple, almost too simple, but there's studies that show it can increase rapport and cooperation significantly.
That's fascinating. But I'm also a little skeptical. Isn't mirroring kind of manipulative? How do you avoid coming across as insincere when you're just repeating what they say?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. It's definitely a technique that has to be used subtly and authentically. The key is to focus on truly understanding the other person's perspective and then reflecting it back to them in a way that feels genuine.
So it's not about mimicking their every word or gesture. It's about reflecting their underlying emotions and intentions.
Right, exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see how that could be powerful.
Yeah, and Voss has some pretty convincing evidence to back up his claims. He talks about a study where waiters who mirrored their customers received significantly higher tips than those who didn't, which is crazy.
Wow.
It really highlights the power of this simple technique to build rapport and influence behavior.
So mirroring is kind of like a secret weapon for building that rapport and getting people on your side. But what about those times when things get a little tense? Because negotiations can't always be smooth sailing.
Absolutely. And that's where labeling emotions comes in. Instead of shying away from negative emotions, Voss actually encourages us to acknowledge them directly.
So instead of ignoring the elephant in the room, you call it out.
Exactly. You might say something like, it seems like you're feeling frustrated about this proposal. Just by simply putting a name to the emotion can help de-escalate the situation.
That's interesting. It's like you're diffusing a bomb by carefully dismantling it instead of just trying to throw it away.
Exactly. And it works both ways. Labeling positive emotions can actually reinforce them and strengthen the relationship. So it's all about demonstrating that you see and hear the other person, even when things get tough.
Okay, this is all making sense, but there's one thing I'm still kind of stuck on. You mentioned embracing the no as a
Yeah.
positive thing.
Yeah.
Help me understand that because usually no feels like a dead end in a negotiation.
Right. But Voss actually flips that on its head. He says that no is actually incredibly valuable because it can reveal what the other person truly cares about.
So it's not necessarily a rejection, it's an invitation to dig a little bit deeper.
Precisely. And so instead of fearing the no, you should actually encourage it. So instead of asking, do you have a few minutes to talk, which is almost forcing a yes, try is now a bad time to talk.
Ah, so you're giving them permission to say no, but you're also signaling that you are serious about having this conversation.
Exactly. And if they say, yes, now's a bad time, you can then follow up with, okay, well, when would be a better time? So you're respecting their boundaries, but you're also ensuring that the conversation will happen.
That's a brilliant tactic. It's like these seemingly small shifts in language that can make such a big difference. You're subtly guiding the conversation, but you're also giving the other person that sense of control.
Exactly. Voss really emphasizes the importance of making the other person feel in control, even if you're the one steering the ship, so to speak. It's about creating a collaborative environment where everyone feels heard and respected.
This is all making a lot of sense. But what about when you get down to actually hammering out the details of a deal? How do you approach that aspect of the negotiation?
Well, Voss has some really interesting ideas about that too, particularly when it comes to something he calls bending reality through anchoring and framing.
Okay, so bending reality. That sounds a little like Jedi mind tricks. How does that work?
Well, think about it this way. If you're trying to buy a used car and the seller throws out this ridiculously high number, that number, even though it's outrageous, becomes the starting point in your mind. You're anchored to it.
Ah, so it sets the stage for everything that comes after. But what if you're the one setting the anchor?
Exactly. And so Voss says that by framing your offers strategically, you can subtly nudge the other person's expectations in your favor. Like, for example, let's say your target price is $100. You don't start there. You might start by mentioning comparable products or services that go for $150.
So even though you're not actually asking for $150, you're creating this reference point that makes $100 seem more reasonable.
Precisely. He also suggests using odd numbers in your offers. It makes them seem more calculated, like you didn't just pull it out of thin air.
That's interesting. So you're signaling that you've put a lot of thought into this. Your offer is based on solid reasoning. But what about when the other side throws out their anchor and it's way off base? How do you counter that?
Voss calls it counter-anchoring. You acknowledge their offer, but you reframe the conversation by introducing a lower anchor that's more in line with your target. And he also talks about the importance of avoiding round numbers in your counter offers.
So instead of countering with $50, you might counter with $48,500.
Exactly. Gives it more weight, more credibility.
It makes it seem like you've carefully considered all the variables. Okay, these are great tactics for that initial back and forth, but how do you make sure that the other person actually follows through on what they've agreed to? Because getting to yes is one thing, but actually getting things done is another.
That's such a crucial point. Voss really emphasizes focusing on the how. It's not enough to just get them to agree to something. You need them to be able to articulate how they're going to make it happen.
So instead of just saying, okay, we'll do that, you push for specifics.
Yeah.
Like, what are the concrete steps you're going to take to implement this?
Exactly. And Voss suggests asking questions like, how will we know we're on track? Or how will we address things if we find we're off track? It's about making them active participants in the process, not just passive recipients of instructions.
So you're kind of creating this shared roadmap that everyone is invested in. But even with all these techniques, there's still that element of the unknown, right? What about those unforeseen factors that can come up and completely change the game?
Ah, yes. Those are what Voss calls black swans. Remember we talked about that in the beginning? These are those hidden pieces of information that can just completely shift the power dynamic.
Right, the stuff you don't see coming.
Yeah.
But how do you even begin to uncover those black swans? It feels like searching for a needle in a haystack.
It's definitely challenging, but Voss argues it's crucial. And it requires kind of a shift in mindset. It's moving away from just focusing on the surface level of the negotiation and digging a little bit deeper into your counterpart's world, their motivations.
So you become a bit of a detective, looking for those subtle clues that reveal what truly drives them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Voss really emphasizes asking open-ended questions, not just about their business, but about their background, their experiences, and listening carefully, not just to their words, but their tone, their body language.
He even mentions paying attention to their pronoun usage, right? Like how often they say I versus we.
That's right. It can be a very subtle indicator of their sense of authority, their decision-making process. He also highlights a few common mistakes that negotiators often make when trying to understand their counterparts.
Ooh, give me the inside scoop. What are those mistakes?
Well, one is assuming that the other person is simply ill-informed. Sometimes they genuinely lack information. And instead of getting frustrated, you can try to identify those knowledge gaps and fill them in.
So instead of battling it out, you're actually working together to create that shared understanding.
Exactly. Another one is failing to consider constraints you might not be aware of. They might have internal policies or budget limitations, things that are completely outside of their control.
So understanding the playing field, not just the players.
Right. And then the third mistake is overlooking their other interests. Maybe they're worried about how this deal will impact their team or their reputation within the company.
It's like those hidden anxieties or aspirations that are driving their decisions. But uncovering all of that sounds pretty time-consuming. How do you do it efficiently?
Well, Voss is all about maximizing your time. And he talks about the similarity principle, this idea that people are more likely to concede to those they see as similar to themselves.
Oh, so finding that common ground, those shared experiences or values that create a sense of connection.
Exactly. Voss even suggests using your own name to create that sense of familiarity. He calls it the Chris discount.
The Chris discount. I love that. It's like you're saying, hey, we're on the same team here. Let's figure this out together.
Exactly. And Voss argues that these seemingly small gestures can have a huge impact on the tone and outcome of the negotiation. But what about those situations where the other person is really playing hardball?
Yeah, the ones who come in with a take it or leave it attitude. How do you handle that kind of negotiation without getting steamrolled?
That's where Voss introduces a technique called the Ackerman model. It's a very systematic approach to bargaining, designed to prevent you from getting stuck in the middle and leaving value on the table.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about the Ackerman model. How does it work?
So the Ackerman model involves 6 steps. You start by determining your target price, your ideal outcome, and then you make an initial offer that's 65% of your target.
Whoa, that seems really low. Are you sure that's right?
It might seem counterintuitive, but starting low is key. It establishes that strong anchor, and it signals that you are serious about getting a good deal.
So you're not just giving away your bargaining power, you're strategically setting the stage. What happens next?
Okay, so then you calculate 3 raises, but they're in decreasing increments. 85% of your target, then 95%, and then your final offer is 100%. The idea is to gradually increase your offer while you're gauging the other side's willingness to move.
So you're testing their flexibility, seeing how much they're willing to budge.
Exactly. And each time you increase your offer, you use all the techniques we've talked about. Empathy, calibrated questions, embracing no.
Right, so you're not just throwing out numbers, you're using every interaction to gain a deeper understanding of their position.
That's right.
That makes a lot of sense. What else is important to remember when using the Ackerman model?
Voss really emphasizes using precise, non-round numbers. So instead of offering $50, you might offer $48,875.
Oh, so it really seems like you've carefully considered every variable. But what happens when you get to your final number, your 100% target price? Is that the end of the road?
Not necessarily. Voss suggests adding in a non-monetary item at the end, something they probably don't even want, just to show you've reached your limit.
Oh, it's like that final flourish, a way of saying, this is my best and final. Take it or leave it. I like that.
Right. It's a very subtle but powerful way to signal that you're at the end of your rope. And so, while the Ackerman model might seem a little formulaic at first, it's actually a really proven technique for navigating those tough bargaining moments.
So we've talked about a lot of different tactics and techniques, but I'm wondering, how do you know which ones to use and when? It just seems like it'd be really easy to get overwhelmed in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, and that's where understanding those different negotiating styles we talked about comes in. Yeah, it can be. It really can. And that's where understanding those different negotiating styles comes in. Voss says that accommodators are all about relationships, keeping things harmonious.
Hmm.
They're often quick to compromise, even to their own detriment sometimes.
Ah, so they're the peacemakers. The ones who just want everyone to leave the table feeling good, even if it means they don't necessarily get everything that they wanted. What about the assertives, though? How do you recognize them?
Well, assertives, they are goal-oriented.
Okay.
They're laser-focused on getting what they want. They can be very competitive, even aggressive in their approach sometimes.
So they're the ones who come to the table ready to fight for every inch.
It can be, yeah. But the key is to not get drawn into a battle of egos. With assertives, it's really important to be clear about your objectives, but also to demonstrate that you respect their drive and their ambition.
So you meet their assertiveness with your own, but in a way that's still respectful and collaborative.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Now, what about the analysts? What makes them tick?
Analysts are all about data. They're methodical, data-driven. They want to understand every nuance before they make a decision.
So they're the ones who come to the table with spreadsheets and graphs ready to dissect every single clause and every comma.
That's a good way to put it. It can be exhausting. But the key with them is to be patient and prepared. With analysts, it's crucial to provide very clear, concise information and to appeal to their sense of logic and reason.
So with analysts, it's all about the facts and figures, the cold, hard data.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how differently people approach negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you actually figure out someone's negotiating style? Do you just have to guess?
Voss actually provides some helpful tips on how to identify these different styles, pay attention to their body language, their tone of voice, the kinds of questions they ask.
So you're like a detective looking for clues that reveal their underlying motivations.
Exactly. And once you have a sense of their style, you can tailor your approach accordingly. So, for instance, with accommodators, you might focus on building rapport and highlighting the collaborative nature of the negotiation.
So you emphasize the shared goal, that win-win outcome that will make everyone happy.
Right, exactly. And then with assertives, it's important to be clear and assertive yourself. Don't back down, but also avoid getting drawn into a power struggle.
So it's finding that sweet spot between standing your ground and maintaining that respectful dialogue. What about analysts, though? How do you keep them engaged without getting too bogged down in the details?
With analysts, be prepared to provide detailed information and to answer all of their questions thoroughly. Don't rush them. Allow them the time they need to process the information and to come to a decision.
So patience is key with analysts. You have to be willing to walk them through that process step by step.
Right.
This is all incredibly helpful, but it also sounds a bit overwhelming, to be honest. It's like learning a whole new language.
Do you have any advice for putting all of this into practice for someone who's just starting out?
Practice is key, just like anything else. And Voss actually encourages role-playing, trying out these techniques in a safe environment, maybe with a friend or colleague.
So you can experiment, make mistakes, refine your approach before you're actually in a high-stakes situation.
Exactly. And remember that no one masters these techniques overnight. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to kind of embrace mistakes as learning opportunities. So it's not about achieving some kind of perfect negotiation. It's about constantly learning and evolving your approach.
That's it. And as you gain experience, you'll start to develop your own style, adapting these techniques to fit your personality and your specific negotiating context.
This is not about becoming a Chris Voss clone. It's about finding your own authentic voice as a negotiator.
Exactly. And Voss emphasizes that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to negotiation. What works in one situation might not work in another. So the key is to be adaptable, flexible, and responsive to the nuances of each interaction.
That makes a lot of sense. This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of negotiation. I
Yeah.
feel like I've learned so much. But before we say goodbye, is there any other final piece of wisdom you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, just remember that negotiation is an art, not a science. Embrace the challenge, have fun with it, and never stop learning. Who knows? Maybe you'll discover some black swans of your own along the way.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference. We've covered a lot of ground, but this is just the beginning of your negotiation journey. Keep practicing, keep experimenting, and keep those black swans in your sights. Until next time, happy negotiating.